Chapter 24. Acts chapter 24, this morning is where we'll be at. Remember, in Acts chapter 23, we had where Paul is before the tribune. I think that's right. I'm probably saying it wrong. Claudius Lysis, and essentially he makes the decision after having Paul before the elders and everyone else as they're making accusation. Claudius makes the decision and says, I'm going to send you to the governor, and we're going to let the governor make a decision about this. And so he sends him to Felix over in Caesarea. And he sends this letter with them. And all of this is in response to the fact that they found out that the Jews were planning to kill Paul. Because remember, they'd made an oath where they said, we're not going to eat, we're not going to drink until we see Paul dead. And so they had 40 people that had made that declaration and that vow. And so they were laying in wait to be able to kill Paul. So Claudius' response is he sends 470 soldiers with Paul to then escort him to Felix, the governor. And so obviously with that, there's not going to be any assassination attempt that happens because they have spearmen, they have soldiers with the sword, and they have cavalry that escort Paul to where they're going. So he very well protects Paul to get him to Felix. And again, it's the same kind of thing. So they started off with an accusation in the street, and then that moved to an accusation before the Claudius, and then now Claudius is sending them to the governor, Felix, so that now they can have another hearing about these accusations that the Jews are bringing toward Paul, right? And so that's kind of where we're picking up here in chapter 24 of Acts. So Acts 24 and verse 1. And after 5 days, the high priest Annas came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul. And when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Since through you we enjoy much peace, since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation. In every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. For we have found this man a plague, one who stirs up riots among all the Jews throughout the world, and is a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him. The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that all these things were so. All right, so what are the accusations that the Jews have against Paul? Yeah, he's riotous, right? And for those of y'all who are new to me, I don't spell worth anything, so sorry if you look at it and you're like, what word is that? It's okay. He's very riotous, right? So he's a troublemaker, if you will, right? He's always stirring up problems is what one of the accusations, right, against Paul. What else do we have? Ringleader, right? Yeah. Of this dangerous sect of the Nazarene, right? What else do they charge him with? Yes. They profaned or was planning to or had profaned the temple, right? And there is one other kind of side thing that they accuse him of. He's a plague, yeah. So these are the basic things that they bring against Paul, right? And they bring this to the governor. Really, from like the governor's standpoint, when you look at most of them, these three right here, I don't think the governor would ever really even care about, right? What does he care if there's another sect that's doing something, right? Or what does he care about the Jewish temple? Now, Felix is not a Jew. He doesn't care if what they do. And if anything, he would go in and profane it himself. He doesn't care if the Jews are upset with this guy, saying that he's messing with our religion. Now what he would care about is this up here. Is he actually causing riots? Is he actually causing? Now that gets their attention, right? Because they want everybody to be calm and be happy and go to work and pay your taxes. That's what they want. They don't want anybody causing trouble, right, for whatever reason, right? And so really of the 4 that they present to the governor, 3 of which he's probably in his mind like, okay, that doesn't really mean anything to me. But the riotous one, that's one that he's like, okay, we need to make sure we take care of that, right? Because that's not good. That's not good for the government. That's not good for maintaining peace or any of the other kind of good stuff like that. And so these are the things that the Jews essentially are bringing to Felix and accusing Paul of. Now, as we go on, we're going to hear Paul's defense, right? Verse 10. And when the governor had nodded to him to speak, Paul replied, knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither can they prove to you that they now bring up what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now after several years I came to bring alms to my nation and present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you, and to make an accusation should they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found when I stood before the council. Other than this one thing that I cried out while respect to the resurrection of the dead, that I am on trial before you this day. So essentially Paul goes through and he goes through great lengths as he's talking, if you will, to really point out that this right here is wrong, right? So he really points out that, look, when they found me, there was no crowd, there was no tumult, there was no riot, whether in the city or at the temple or anywhere else, right? And that's one of the big things. And he brings that point up a couple of 3 different times in his rebuttal, right? And to let Felix know, yeah, that's nothing for you to worry about, right? And then, he talks about profaning the temple, and he points out that he was purified, right? And we remember that because remember when he showed up in Jerusalem, he goes to the elders of the church there, and James tells him, hey, look, go and purify yourself, take these men with you for witnesses, right? And pay their costs so they can shave their heads and complete their vow, and then y'all will be purified, and it'll show that what everybody's saying about you isn't true, right? And so they do that, and that's where the Jews essentially grab him is in the temple, but he's saying everything that they're saying is wrong and can be verified by multiple witnesses. And he's kind of like, where's their proof? I've got witnesses, where are they? Why don't we have the proof here to lay out, their things that they say, right? And then he uses an opportunity here whenever he talks about this being a ringleader of the sect. What does he, sect of the Nazarene, what does he actually call it? The way, right? This actually is an allusion back to Isaiah 35, and not by any design of myself, but it's also a part of the sermon that we're going to get into this morning. So I'm going to flip over to Isaiah 35 real quick and read that first part of it for you. Kind of give you a little background context to what the Jews in the room would be remembering, especially because these are the guys that are the high priest and the elders, the religious elite that we often talk about, right? And they, remember, had memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, plus the Psalms, plus all of the prophets and everyone had said. So these are the high-end guys who know everything about the old law. So whenever he brings up and mentions certain things that for us, who may think, well, that's kind of obscure, to them it's going to point something out. So Isaiah chapter 35, I'm going to start in verse 1, and then we'll go through about verse 10, and then you'll start to see, like, oh, now it kind of makes sense what he's talking about. Isaiah 35, verse 1, it says, The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it. The majesty of Carmel and Sharon, they shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen your weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute shall sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become as a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals where they lie down, the grass will become reeds and rushes. And a highway shall be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there. But the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Who and what is Isaiah talking about here? At what point in history did the mute talk, the deaf hear, the lame receive healing and walking? When Christ came. He's talking about the coming of the Messiah, right? Who is the way, the truth, and the life? Who is it? Jesus, right? Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Well, what's he talking about? Paul over here, when he talks about we are the followers of the way. He's talking about it shall be called the way of holiness. Right? Isaiah prophesied about this way, the coming of the Messiah, the effect of Jesus, the effect of the Christ, which is the Greek word for Messiah, right? For all humanity. Right? In that wilderness, there would be water. In that wilderness where they're obviously bereft, they don't have any truth, they don't have any genuineness. It's all about position and power and money and sex and all. That's all it's about for them, right? They've missed the true meaning, the true meaning of what God wanted them to have. And Isaiah says that's going to happen. And this is several hundred years before Jesus was ever even on the earth. And then Paul makes an allusion back to it. He says, this isn't just some sect of a man from Nazareth. He says, this is fulfillment of Scripture, Isaiah 35. And he brings them back to that way of holiness. And so it may not mean anything to Felix, because in Felix's background, he would be like, okay, it doesn't really mean much. But for the Jews that are there, and again, just like before, Paul doesn't run them down. Right? He says, what I'm doing is for good conscience between God and man, in full knowledge of trying to fulfill and worship and serve the holy God. He says, just like these men. They had the same want and attitude as to worship God. It's just that they were not doing it from a position of actual knowledge of who Jesus is. Right? They were doing it from a position of ignorance. And in so doing, they were actually fighting against God, just like Paul was, right? And we talked about how that came up earlier in one of his other things that he talked about. But he's reaching out to them to say, hey, remember what Isaiah said about that way, the way of holiness, and that the righteous will walk on it? That's who I'm following. I'm following the way of Christ. Not some sect or some offshoot that following some guy from Nazareth. That's not it. But it is the way of holiness that Isaiah talked about back in what we would call Isaiah 35. And so he really tries to reach out, I think, to his Jewish audience to point that out to them and to bring home to them that this isn't just some fly-by-night offshoot of Judaism, which is kind of what most of the Romans thought that Christianity was in the beginning, but rather this is the fulfillment of God's prophecy. And he's really laying that, I think, hard for the Jews that are there, that they can have a chance to catch that, to understand that, and if you will, sowing seeds for them of faith so that later on it'll grow and it'll become something that they can then attach faith to and begin to recognize the fulfillment that Christ had, that Jesus had in all of the things that were written by the apostles and the prophets. And so in his response, he takes care of the riotous stuff pretty easily, right? Because it's like, okay, where's your proof? Who are your witnesses? You don't have any because nothing was happening. And then, he talks about, I wasn't profaning anything. As a matter of fact, I'd gone through the 7-day period of purification so that wouldn't happen, right? And then he uses this opportunity again to point to the way, the followers of the way. Why don't we have that as like what we have on our church building today, or when we refer to ourselves to other people? Do you ever say, "Oh yeah, I'm the follower. I go to the church of the followers of the way"? Why don't we do that today? I don't know either, right? I don't know. We don't, right? Would it be wrong? No. Sometimes today we can get so wound up in a name that's on the shingle outside a building that we can miss what God is really trying to teach us, right? And we have to be careful about that, because then we fall into the same thing that the Jews did, right? They were so locked in on their position, their power, their understanding of how God was supposed to fulfill his promisee, right? So they knew, well, this is the way God's going to do it. And if he does it differently, well, then that's not God. Right? We do the same things, right? We get so locked into our traditions and our ways and our stuff, we got to be careful, right? What are some of the other ways that the church is referred to? What are some other names that the church is referred to in the New Testament? You can't use this one, followers of the way. We already typed that one. What are some other things? Yep. We have, so I'm just going to put up here some other names for the church. We have Church of God. We see that mentioned in the scripture a lot. Followers of the way. What else? Bride. Yep. Bride of Christ. Yeah, they kind of bring this point in here, right? And I don't know that that's like, it's almost more of like an accusation as a sect of, but they definitely tie that in to bring that out. And I kind of almost think that that's supposed to be kind of a means of a diss, or of a means of trying to say that they're not respectable, right? Because what's one of the things that we know about in Scripture when they talk about this man from Nazareth? What's one of the catchphrases that somebody says? I think it was Nathaniel, right? Yeah. The common thought was, can anything good come out of Nazareth? I think that's what Nathaniel said. I think that's what he said. I know, right? But the common thought of the day was that Nazareth was a backwater place that was not where you wanted to go or be from. So it was almost like it was a little bit of a diss, in a sense, right? But yeah, they definitely did refer to it as that. What else? How else does the Bible refer to the church? Absolutely, right? We definitely see the Church of Christ. How else? The body, right? I like it. Yeah, I'll take it. Why not? Because who is the cornerstone? Jesus, right? Who is the rock of our salvation? Jesus is, right? What else? Okay, yeah. We're first referred as Christians in Antioch, right? Mm-hmm. Church of the Anointed. Okay. Yeah, it kind of points down to that. There's one other one that I'm thinking of anyhow. Y'all may have several other ones. I don't know. Okay, I like that. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that one, but that is a great one. I should have been thinking about it, because that's a lot of what our sermon is going to be on today, is the unshakable kingdom that we receive. Many times whenever he starts his epistles, he's writing to who? How does he phrase it when he's writing to the different churches? Saints, right? He writes to the assembly of the saints. So all of these different names are different names essentially, or if it's not exactly worded that way, it's something in that direction of the church in the New Testament, right? And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's any one single name that we need to latch on to and say, okay, this is the way it's got to be. No. There's a lot of different names. What's more important than the name, what's going on with the people, right? What's going on when we have worship? What's going on when we have Bible study? More, and beyond that, what's going on in the homes of the families of the people? What's going on in the community? What effect is this group of people having on the community within which that they live, right? What's happening there? That's how you're going to see who the Church of God, the Assembly of the Saints, the kingdom, that's who God's people are, the bride of Christ, the body of Christ. That's who we're looking for, right? And it doesn't really matter what you got on the shingle on the outside. It's what's happening on the inside. And that's the key part. And that's something that we have to be careful with because just like anybody, we can always get locked into our way of doing stuff and our way of labeling things. And then, oh, you don't look like me, you don't sound like me, therefore you must be wrong. Well, who does that sound like? The Jews, right? That's exactly what they did. Because it's a very common human thing, right? That's what we tend to do. So we have to be careful about that, right? And that goes all ways, right? Because you can take that to the nth degree to then say, well, then it doesn't matter about anything. And you can do whatever. As long as you slap Jesus' name on it and say, oh, I believe in my heart, then it's all good. No, that's not what the Bible teaches either, right? So you have to be careful with that because we tend to be people of extreme, right? Flowing on that pendulum of going one way or the other. And the Bible very specifically answers that. It says neither trend to the right nor to the left, right? But walk down that center path that God gives us. And he's not saying, well, just try to make the people on the left and on the right happy and never really have a true stance. He's not saying be jello. It's the exact opposite. He's saying be built on the rock, which does not follow after the left or after the right, but after truth, right? And that's the chord that we're trying to strike when we walk in this life, right? And that's the chord that Paul is walking, and that's why he's catching so much flack, right? Because it runs counter to what the Jews want. I think the Romans are like, we don't really care. You're not causing trouble, but the Jews have a very loud political pull and voice, and so they're trying to. They have to kind of keep the peace, if you will, right? But there's a lot to be said that comes out of these few little statements that Paul brings out. And again, you remember back down at the bottom of verse 21, he says, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. Remember when he said that before, what did that cause? Yeah, it did. It kind of caused a bit of an issue, right? But who had the problem? The Sadducees and the Pharisees, right? Because they were on opposite sides of that belief. Some said that there is no resurrection, there is no angel, there is no spirit, while the Pharisees believed in all. And so when Paul makes that statement, now he's like pitting his opponents against each other, which I think is partly why it took them 5 days to pick out, okay, who are we going to send down here to accuse Paul, right? You're going to have the high priest, and then you're going to have the people that are going to support him, then you're going to have the guy who's the good spokesman, Tertullius, to go down and make their case, right? And so they didn't want that to happen again. They didn't want to get caught in a situation where they could be divided, right? And so I think that's a part of that time that's held off there. And so Paul gives his thing, and now we're going to go to verse 22 here with Felix. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. After some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so he sent for him often and conversed with him. When 2 years had lapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. So something that really struck me as I was studying through this, I never put together how much time this all took. For whatever reason, in my mind, I was like, 3, maybe 6 months, and he was in Rome and all that. No, he has several, probably weeks, if not a couple of months, where he makes that process from the original attack by the Jews. He's under Claudius Lassus the tribune, and then he goes to Felix, and he spends 2 years with Felix, right? And then you have the next guy that comes in, Festus, and he spends a significant amount of time with Festus. And then from there, he goes from there up to Rome, and he spends another 2 years in Rome making his case before Caesar. So this whole process for Paul to get to Rome and all of this same accusation took approximately 5 years, 4.5 to 5 years to actually come to a conclusion. That's crazy. So 5 years in prison, not necessarily because he did anything wrong, but because they couldn't settle the case. It's insane to me to think about it that way. And I think about for us, I know our justice system is slow in a lot of times, in a lot of ways to get something done. But my goodness, 5 years under imprisonment, because of false accusations, essentially, right? But then what happened because of the accusations of the Jews? What did that give Paul an opportunity to do? Preach. And to whom did he preach? Yeah, absolutely. But who was deciding his case? The governor. He talked to the tribune. He talked to 2 governors. He talks to Caesar himself. He talks to King Agrippa and his wife Bernice. He talks to all the leadership of the Jews, right? And he has open opportunity where they're listening to everything he has to say, and he has all these accusations. He puts them away, and then he shares Jesus. And he shares Jesus, right? So for 5 years, he's consistently sharing Jesus. And it's also during this time that he's writing all of the epistles to the different churches, right? So it's during this time that he's held essentially mainly under what I almost call it under house arrest, because he's in a house where he has a Roman guard that he's chained to, but he's living in a house during this time, and he's writing these letters after letters. And all the ones that we reviewed as we went through the book of Acts, as he traveled to those different places. And he's writing all that down. So he has this 5-year time period where basically God says, you're going to sit still. No more traveling, no more anything. You're going to get a chance to preach and teach and present me to the leadership and the public. But more importantly, he's writing these letters that we get to read today to help encourage us as we walk that way, as we walk the way of holiness, as we walk that Christian life that he has given us to walk. But it kind of was very surprising to me whenever I really realized the amount of time that all took to take place. Which I guess it makes sense, because it wasn't like he could sit down at a computer and knock out and have a book written, in a week or two. He's scribing on parchment with a pen, or he's telling somebody else who's doing the same thing, and that's not nearly as fast or as easy. All right, so next week we're going to pick up with chapter 25 and see Paul as he is before Festus and the things that happen there. Any other comments or questions about what we see here this morning? Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Right. Yes.
So they're setting him up. Okay, he's a ringleader of a sect.
Yes.
So that means that he has to show him that he is part of the sect.
Right.
The Romans are going to focus on the sect and not
right. Right.
By profaning the temple, which was what they accused him to start with. But it also is saying that's not us. We don't even like that.
Yeah.
Whereas rabbis.
They're separating themselves from Paul. Right. Yeah, it's not like, oh yeah, this is another Jew who's a buddy of ours who's now acting a fool, right? They're like, no, he's a different sect, he's a different person, he's not us, he's actually profaning us, and we don't want to have anything to do with him. He's a plague, and he's also seditious, right? So he's one who's treason. He's acting out against Rome, is what they're trying to paint him in a picture of. When, no, that's not accurate at all. Imagine that. All right, any other points or comments? Sir? Yes, sir. Yes. Right. Yep. Yes. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Right. Unless you're in a foreign country or Hawaii, because then you go in there and get spam. You're like, wait a minute, hold on. I don't know. Yeah, but you're right, and that's the reason why we have like the designators that we do have, and we recognize that yes, that does put us in a particular traditional way of worship and belief. It's just what we have to be careful of is we say, okay, well, if you wear this label, then that means you're going to hell because you're all wrong because you wear that label. And if you wear this label, that means you're right and you're going to heaven. Now, one, that's not our position to make, to say you're going to hell or heaven, right? That's God's position to make. But we have to be careful about putting up walls of division and separation. Because what is it that brings division and separation? It ain't God. Yeah, it's man. And it's our own jealousy and pride and all that other stuff that gets in the way. All right. Class is yours. Thank you very much.